right, we're going to call the meeting to order at 1:10. We have now established quorum of task force members in the conference room. Ruby, would you please call roll?
Yes. Catherine Vanderwall. Here. Nara Dilbaca, present on Zoom. Rebecca Harper. Here. Jennifer Smith. Here. A fire district representative. Not present. And William Wise.
Present.
Richmond Kelly.
Present.
And Robert Geary. Not present.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm glad Rebecca's here because we now come to rely on her to tell us which minutes we can pass.
That's great.
So the next item on our agenda is consideration of minutes from the April 22nd, 2024 task force meeting.
No.
Okay.
All of them?
Next is June 17th, 2024. So the reason why we're going through this list is we check to see who was here. If you weren't attending in that meeting, then you don't usually vote for the minutes. So we need to establish a quorum of people who are in the room, or task force members who are in the room who were there during that meeting.
Majority.
What was June 17th?
No, yeah, if Nara was in person, but she's.
So no June 17th? How about July 1st?
No, still only 4.
And July 15th? Yes? Whoa!
Yeah.
All right, excellent. We're going to consider the minutes from July 15th, 2024. Give the task force a moment to refresh themselves on the minutes. Are there any questions or amendments needed or recommended or asked by the task force?
I think there's a correction that needs to be made. Robert Geary is not a fire district representative.
Nope, he's traveled. Any further comments, questions from the task force before we open it up to public input? Opening it up to public input on the July 15th, 2024 minutes. Go ahead, Holly. Oh, one moment, Holly. Go ahead.
Oh, hi there, thanks. This is just a question. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but under section, I guess it's section 6, under background checks and clearances. The third subsection says the applicant, owner, or permittee has been convicted of an offense, but I didn't see anywhere where they required the owner to have a background check.
Could you tell me where we're looking again? The section? Oh, number 3?
Yeah.
Yep. We had not officially added property owner to the same requirements as the permittees and employees. Is my
So
understanding.
there's no way that would be triggered, right?
Should just be the applicant or permittee.
Applicant or permittee. Yeah, thank you. That's a typo.
And then what about the subsequent instance of that? Also deleted.
Yep, subsequent mentioning where it says applicant, owner, or permittee, and then down in that third bolded section of section 3, evidence of rehabilitation of the applicant or owner, that should be removed. Thanks, Holly. Is there any further public input on the minutes? If not, we will bring it back to the task force for action.
I move to accept and file the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
Thank Thank you. We have a first or a motion and a second. All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? All right, passes 5-0. Then moving on to section 73.3, property owners approval. We have yet to make a final motion or take action of any kind on this one. Except, you said that, you pointed, no.
Yes.
Since our last meeting, staff has met with county council and the treasurer tax collector, and the treasurer tax collector is actually moving in a different direction now regarding amendments to the tax ordinance to address the need that he has for being able to collect cannabis taxes. So he has withdrawn his request that we make amendments to the code for that. So just for clarity, that means that the request from the treasurer tax collector's office that the property owner be a co-permittee has been withdrawn.
And we did leave the motion in there to accept the language as amended with that, not including the strikeout there. But I'm not sure if we need to reword that. Just wanted to remind you that there's a motion.
There was a motion made before?
No, there was just one
Oh, okay.
motion potential.
So back to motion for consideration.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The listed agencies.
So it goes back to our statement pretty much as it exists right now, I think, which is also consistent with all of our other building permits and use permits, that if the application is submitted by someone other than the property owner, we do require owner authorization.
And that's the same with the state too, so.
Okay.
So is the highlighted section where it says written approval shall be renewed annually, is that already in there? or would that be
Yes,
new?
it's already
Yeah,
in there.
that's in there.
So applies. So the motion would be to leave the language as is then?
Unless further amendments are requested by this body. All right, if the task force has no questions, let's open this section up for public input. Is there anyone in the Zoom room or in the room who would like to make public comment on this one? Property owner approval. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the task force for action.
I'm confused, is this a pending motion, how is it, or not, or was, that was simply what we had talked about previously, but what was there was some mention of a motion or something.
The possible motion is pretty much maintain the current language
I see.
as amended, which we have not done any amendments, so let's just take that out too. So the motion then would be to maintain the current language for property owner approval. And I don't know what the listed agencies is. What does that mean?
It was there previously, but I was also wondering that, if that is a
I have
part
no
of
idea
the
what that means.
code where it's listed, do you know?
It might mean that,
It's been like that.
it might mean that the property owner has to be registered with the state
Oh.
resource board and so on and so forth.
Why don't we just say maintain the current language?
Yeah,
We good with that? Let's cut out all the rest of the confusing stuff. All right, so
So I'll make a motion to maintain the current language for property owner's approval.
the motion and a second, Catherine and Richmond. I got it right.
You did.
Yeah, see, I was practicing. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All righty. Moving on. I think we're back to tree removal now. I just want to thank Donna for that presentation that she gave us last week. That was really great. And also, just note that there is a letter from Redbud, from Donna on behalf of the Redbud Audubon, suggesting wording that is after what page. It's on page 63.
And then we also added the local area plan references. And, I'm forgetting his name right now, but in public comment, the gentleman that provided this, 8,000 Oaks.
Tom, yeah. Yes, thank you, Margot, the email from Margot regarding getting those links for us. Our ordinance currently talks about avoiding or minimizing removal of certain quercus and tan oak species. The letter on page 63 recommends or suggests rewording of that to regarding specific types of oaks, from avoided and minimized to any of them over 6 inches in diameter, removal be prohibited. And then adds a suggestion of other commercial trees that should be, removal of those should be avoided or minimized. And then the recommendations regarding their oak trees, also from Thousand Oaks. I didn't have that in detail to be able to capture here. But I really like that you included the forest studies report of how effective it has been. That's cool, thank you. I'm thinking that if that there's data in here from the stuff that you sent us that will be very helpful in rolling out administrative processes that'll be based on whatever we decide in the ordinance.
I also have, it must have been a PDF conversion thing, but on page 44, we had included something from, it says UC Oaks, and it was a table of all jurisdictions and sort of what their policies are. So I can resend those out since there was something happened there.
There's a coding issue.
Yeah.
Is that a component of that the email from Patrick Boozinger?
No.
I think it was after, oh no, so, right. So the tree removal is after the grading stuff that Catherine gave us. And then the tree removal was a compilation of existing policies, both for the general plan, and then we didn't have some of the local area plans captured, so Michelle went through and added the rest of those. If the task force would like to provide direction to staff, if we're not ready to make like a concise modification to this little piece of wording, but if we would prefer, if Michelle and Ruby and I had a clear idea on where the task force kind of wants to go with this, if we want to leave it the same, if we wanted to strengthen pieces up, change pieces, then that would help us, because right now we've just been compiling data.
Rebecca Harper, my idea would be to leave the majority of the language as it is, but include a phrase that states like, unless tree removal ordinance specifies otherwise, or something like that. So that way, if we do develop a more holistic tree removal ordinance, this would be superseded, but until then, I don't think that it makes sense to make regulations that are inconsistent with other development standards for other industries.
Richmond Kelly, I actually like the limiting of the greater than 6 inch diameter. And there's a lot of information to back that up, because you'll find out when you read through it.
Limiting or prohibiting?
Prohibiting any bigger than 6, and that's a 35-year-old tree for most of us. So, yeah, I think for us, setting an example of some kind of forces the issue a little bit, which I think Lake County needs to do. A challenge is that cannabis is treated differently, and in my mind, I have to flip that around because I don't think it should be, but it is. So, and that's the part I have to continuously remember, the 1 acre for 20, because I think of my own property, and every 20 acre section, I go, yeah, I could find, an acre to put a grow on that I would feel good about, that would meet pretty much most of these standards we're talking about. I also think my challenge, again, I don't want to go into weeds on this, but every time I see that we're requiring cannabis to do something we're not requiring of the rest of the industry, I feel like dollar per dollar, the extra cost that they're incurring should be subtracted from the canopy tax or from something. It just feels really heavy-handed. So I'm personally constantly kind of going over this in my head, trying to figure out how to balance that out. But the trees seem like, because it's cannabis, they do have a different rights than how they pick their grows. It seems like this, keeping the 6-inch or greater trees is doable to me. And the people I talk to in South County, especially in Jerusalem Valley, not they have a lot of oak trees down there, so that could be part of it. But my property's full of them, and I, we walked it and thought about it, and before I came up, and it works for us. But that's one little, I think there needs to be a lot of input on this one.
I have a question that kind of follows along, if I can, Richmond.
Sure.
The reason I brought up the Patrick Mosinger email a minute ago, and I actually saw similar language in a couple of different spots throughout this, but specifically it mentions a fee to be paid to an Oak Woodland Conservation Fund, and it includes a calculation for what that fee would be. This is on page 49, if anyone wants to make reference. But specifically, it says that the fee would be equal to the number of old growth valley oaks impacted times 0.75 times the current land value. And then it says the land value figure used should be based on current real estate prices in Lake County for lands containing native oak woods. And I'm curious if we could run a set of numbers for a property, and maybe yours. If you wanted to remove a couple of oak trees because you wanted to put in a structure, whatever, pick your reason. What are we talking about, right? I mean, like, we're going to throw a number at the value of your property.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I don't mean to make it too personal.
No,
but we put that in there for Z.
Right.
But then you have the number of oaks you'd be impacting times 0.75 times that number. And I mean, maybe I'm an idiot, but that seems like we could be talking about a very large amount of money for removing some oak trees. If that's the purpose of this, to deter it or to prohibit it or whatever, fair enough. But my question / concern at the last meeting on this subject was about private property rights and the ability to sort of like achieve what are generally considered to be good or defensible outcomes with respect to property use, and what rule changes like this might do to that across the county. So, this is the question for the group I was going to ask.
I think it's a valid question.
Yeah.
One, just trying to figure out or thinking about how I'm going to figure this out to run an exercise is exhausting.
I'm sorry, I don't
even know what it is. Yeah.
I see numbers on
So
Michael's phone.
But additionally, the question then would be, where does that money go and what do we do with it? Because we're not set up to do anything.
It usually has to be like a mitigation bank that's set up through.
Right.
It's probably why Christian Game at the time was involved.
I
I know
don't,
it's all very lawyery. Really.
I'm also tempted to ask if it would be possible to go to public comment so that Michael would be free to speak.
Do we have any other questions, concerns from the task force? Then we'll go to public input. Go ahead, Michael.
okay, just because I mix things up all the time, but that was what Will brought up, this is exactly what I had highlighted going through this and just having the same kind of question in my mind. Let's say your property's worth 500,000, just rough, 20 acres, 500,000. Now, I don't know if it's just a mistake in how it got written, But if we do 500,000, say we're going to get one tree, all right, for simplicity, and we multiply that by 0.75, and I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here, but that's $300,000. So I don't know if it's meant to be 0.75% of the total value of property, which would make a lot more sense.
The other instance of this formula includes actually just a 1, not a 0.75, so.
Which would be 100% of the value, because there's no percentages added to any of these numbers. So if it stood the way it's written, but I screw things up all the time, it would seem like it would, just how it's written, it would either be hundreds of thousands of dollars, or if we're moving decimals, even moving a decimal across $300,000 is
It'd still be 37 grand.
it's astronomical.
If it was like 5 trees.
For one tree.
So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, because I think, to Will's point, if we're trying to just make it so people don't take out trees, I think that would probably do it.
Yeah.
But to, I guess to keep everything in context, maybe we could come up with a different number. We don't have to use those numbers or something else. I do totally agree. Obviously, trees are super important. My 5-year-old could tell you how important trees are, right? But so ultimately we come back to like a workable regulation. If we create regulation that nobody can operate under, then we, collapse it. So what's workable, and not just what's fair, but what makes sense, I think is really the question. Jennifer?
I'm the one that tells people their names.
I'm sorry.
But thank you for participating. Are we bringing it back to the task force? If not, we've got some hands up in the Zoom room. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Sarah Bodnar, consultant. And, I want to make a couple comments. First, that I think that I understand that because cannabis has been the most highly regulated and enforced upon industry, it's easy to kitchen sink everything on this industry. But that, the ecological resources of the county are about the whole picture of the county. And I think that setting exceptional policy just for cannabis is biased and opportunist. And I think that looking at tree management, and I said this last time, is about protecting open spaces, and keeping ag land in ag is a form of protecting open space. And we're not talking about oak tree removal for a net loss when it's occurring. Every single permit has a mitigation plan, which is unparalleled and unprecedented, and a multiplier of trees have to be planted. So we're looking at a net gain under the current language that we already have. I wanted to share a little bit about what happened in Mendocino County. I've looked at the chart that was shared of all 41 counties, and I think every single county in California has pretty unique character, but our neighbors in Mendocino have some similar topography, and they actually contemplated a countywide oak tree and oak woodlands management ordinance over the last couple of years, and the Board of Supervisors ended up voting against it. And it looked a lot like some of the recommendations that we've seen come forward to this task force. And when they contemplated it and considered it, whereas Mendocino County is highly concerned with protecting its natural resources and beauty, they ended up voting against the ordinance because of two main reasons: that there was a lack of actual local data about oak trees. And one of the supervisors who works in ag predicted that there was actually a gain happening over time and not a net loss, and that the data that is often shared wasn't specific and exacting to the local area. And secondly, they found it ultimately unenforceable. And back to some of the comments that Will made at the last meeting, like when you start putting so many restrictions on activity, you can make it very difficult for people to even limb a tree that's presenting danger. Require a permit for that to happen. But when you need to limb a tree because there's a threat, fire, or public safety, you need to limit. And these were the concerns that were raised by the board there, and why they ended up throwing the whole thing away, actually. So my personal opinion is that this should be a conversation that happens at the board level, and that the whole county's ecological resources should be considered holistically, and not just exceptionally for cannabis alone, and look at the pros and cons of trying to regulate something like this on a countywide level. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Go ahead, Donna.
Hello, Donna Mackwitz, Red Bed Audubon. I just had a question. I was wondering how the ordinance that was adding Article 73 to Chapter 21 of the Lake zoning ordinance that addressed commercial cannabis permitting activities and enforcement. It was in 2020 we first heard of it, and then again it came to the board, I believe, on May 19th of 2022. And in that, it did address tree removal. I just wondered, where are we and how do we consider Article 73 of Chapter 21? Thank you.
Thanks. Article 73 does not actually exist yet. You'll see that it's throughout this draft because the pathway that we are using is to extract or remove cannabis policy from Article 27 and then encapsulate it entirely within Article 73, thereby establishing a new article. So it only exists in pretty much this draft that we hand out for our task force meetings because we're using it as a structure of topics to go through. But Article 73 has not been adopted by the board. Right? Or am I wrong? I think I'm right. Because Article 72 was the old cannabis policy, and that's gone. And then it got moved to 27, and now we're talking about consolidating it all again. Yeah, this is going to become Article 73. Okay, good. Glad I was wrong. Hey, Donna, while you're here, though, I remember part of your presentation at the last meeting talked about an emphasis on replanting certain species because of the attacks on other species of oak.
Right.
Could you just recapture that piece again, please? Bring that. I'd like that to be back in the forefront as maybe an option for the task force.
I believe, well, we know for sure we're having the attack from the Mediterranean oak borer beetle and also sudden oak death. So I think the recommendation was planting a variety, and I remember they said do black oaks, not just, we know our live oaks are being hit the hardest. So first we know our live oaks are going and then our blue oaks will be going. So I think they recommended black and then mixing of blue, and then they also suggested putting other species in there. I can go back and get what Mike Jones said in his last, the risk reduction Zoom that they had last week. That was excellent. He mentioned that also. So let me go back and get that data, and I'll try to get it for you right away.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring that back for the task force. So because setting a replanting sort of recommendation may be where this task force wants to go as well as an option. See, we did, I could see Margot wanting to raise her hand. Did we just have another hand up? Peter, we'll get to you in just one moment. Go ahead, Margot.
Thanks, Mariah. So if you're talking about replanting, just keep in mind, I believe it's a CEQA requirement that means monitoring for 7 years on the health of the seedlings. And you also have to ensure but try to promote an environment that is most conducive for those seedlings' survival. So that means irrigation. And so that means making sure that that is like a condition of approval, that happens. Also, to address Will's concern, a lot of the municipalities that have adopted these oak ordinances, they have private property owners' rights in mind, and so they make exceptions for health and safety when there's fire danger, or when you have to limb up, or you have a dangerous limb, etc. So that is built into it. And then again, instead of reinventing the wheel, if the task force chooses, yes, like how I'm sorry, I'm drawing.
Rebecca?
Rebecca, sorry. Rebecca says, yeah, point to the holistic tree ordinance. That's great. And till then, maybe you don't want to stray into specifics about tree management. But if you do, don't reinvent the wheel. Go with best practices and what some other municipalities have done. Then you don't have to think of scenarios and how you're going to deal with them. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Peter Lucchetti, if your hand is still raised, and then I think Nara was after that, and then Holly.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all the kind work you're doing, the fine work you're doing. I own the ranch at the end of Grange Road, the 276 Ranch. We raise organic beef cattle. And I just want to say two things. One, we are being catastrophically impacted by oak stress, and trees are falling down everywhere and dying on the ranch. It's a tragedy and really terrible. I don't think cannabis farmers should be prejudicially penalized in an oak policy. But that said, I agree with the Lake County Board of Supervisors declaring a state of emergency on oak catastrophe or oak stress because it's countywide. And it is changing our environment and our whole aesthetic and our whole way of looking at things in Lake County, what you see when you drive down the road. So I don't think cannabis folks should be prejudicially affected, but I don't think any form of farming or any form of natural environment should be exempt from some serious consideration of protecting oak trees in Lake County. Full stop. You're all invited to come down the ranch anytime. I'm telling you, it's a catastrophe. And what we're having to do to deal with it is a catastrophe. I mean, thousands of dollars we're spending picking up dead oak trees and creating burn piles, and then going through an arduous process with the AQMD to get the burn piles burned down when the burn season's so short. Okay, my second comment, and then I'll turn it back to you, is just wanted to make a technical point of clarification. When someone talks about a mitigated negative declaration, and they say, oh, I'm subject to all these requirements as a consequence of having received a mitigated negative declaration. That's true of anyone who receives a mitigated negative declaration for anything in Lake County. Whatever the requirements are, you got that because you didn't have to go through a CEQA lawsuit, or you didn't have to go through a deeper CEQA review and then possibly a CEQA lawsuit. You got a pass. I would point out that in the case of cannabis, and this is a up at another time. In the case of cannabis, of every cannabis application that has been approved in Lake County to date, I couldn't find one, and I went through every one that had not received a mitigated negative declaration. Every one got a pass. Not a single one is being reviewed for any kind of serious environmental consideration. So the cannabis industry is already getting enormously favorable treatment, considering that not one has received any kind of serious review beyond the staff report for a mitigated negative declaration. And I think that's something to be brought up at the appropriate time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll move on to Nara.
Hey folks, Nara Dalbaka, normally sitting in there in the task force room. So I appreciate y'all letting me weigh in as a member of the public today. I missed the tree presentation, so I'd like to go back and review that. But Lake County has a specific rule against spot zoning. I know this is not what this would not be spot zoning, but when you're calling out a single industry for a countywide problem, it starts to feel a lot like spot legislating. And this is a countywide problem. I think, as many of the other commenters has said, this is something that needs to be addressed. I think cannabis is a small industry in the county, or it's a large amount of the permits that are coming through right now. But that's because these other industries are already permitted, have already received their mitigated negative declarations from the county in order to operate. Wineries, orchards, cattle ranching, all of those things all received the mitigated negative declarations in order to operate. This is just, cannabis happens to be the one that's going through the most permitting right now. But in terms of the actual footprint in the county, you're not gonna get very far going after just cannabis. And so I think it has to be looked at holistically. I think Sarah was right that this should be considered by the board. We love our trees, and again, my 5-year-old will also agree. Trees are very important for heating, for shade, for hillside retention, for all these things. And so what we can do to protect them, I think, most of us are good with. And I think, again, you're going to find that the majority of illegal or unwanted removal of trees is not coming from the licensed cannabis operators in the county. So that's what I got for you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Nara. Before we move on to the next speaker, just because there's a conversation about CEQA and levels of analysis, I just want everybody to understand there are different types of projects within state law. Some of them are considered ministerial, building permits, things like that, or going into a use by right zoning district to open your store in an existing retail establishment. Those do not require CEQA because they're exempted due to their ministerial status. You then get into projects that fit the definition of a project that requires environmental review. And with environmental review, there are 4 levels. One is no impact or a negative declaration. There is nothing that we see, or no, one would be exemptions. It fits into the categorical or the statutorial exemptions approved by the state. And so that one, it gets out through a CADX or just an explanation in the staff report. Then after that, if it's not exempted, then we, as staff, as lead agency, we perform an environmental analysis that uses the initial study checklist from state regulations. That analyzes with the requirements of all the studies we find necessary, which could include hydrology, noise, art, cultural resource studies, anything else that we think is really important for that particular project. We combine all of that, all those studies reports, and we go through our environmental checklist, which I think has 18 categories now from the state, taking a look at how this proposed project could have an effect on the environment. If we find anything that is that is greater than no impact or less than significant, we will then look for mitigations. Mitigations are requirements that are imposed on a project in order to lessen the environmental impact to a less than significant status. That's when you get not a CADX or a categorical exemption or a negative declaration. That's when you get to the mitigated negative declaration stage. So there's no passes, it doesn't qualify for exemptions of any kind. It goes through a rigorous study and analysis and generates a list of what we call mitigations, which are actually even separate from conditions. Those mitigations and conditions on that project are drafted together into a single document and presented to the deciding body, be it the zoning administrator, the planning commissioner, or the board of supervisors. They then have the responsibility for approving that list of mitigations and conditions for that particular project, agreeing or substantiating that with those requirements, this project would now achieve a less than significant impact on the environment. Thank you. We'll go on to Holly, please.
Oh, hi there. First of all, I want to say that I do support what Audubon has to say. Basically, the language they have is very similar to what's there, except for the protection of older oaks, 6 inches and larger. I also wanted to say, and I appreciate too what Mr. Lichetti said about the oaks dying. You know, I have a 40 by 80 foot lot, and I just lost a couple 100-year-old oak tree, and it is devastating. And I wanted to say that contrary to public perception, we do support the local small growers very, very much, and we want to see them thrive. I do believe that the local small growers also do care about the environment and what's going on, the bulk of them, most of them. It's the larger corporations that come in from out of county that just are wanting to hoping to, create a profit. So maybe one could put in something based on the size of the project. You have a lot more leeway putting in cannabis if you have a larger lot. Possibly that's something that could be looked at. I do think, though, this is so important that it does need a bit more discussion. And hopefully at the same time, an ordinance is put together that goes to the board. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, thanks, Holly. Yeah, the next few topics that we are discussing tend to be meatier ones. So that's why today's goal was to just sort of get a feel for where the task force wants to go so that maybe we can start compiling a list of options for you to consider. One moment, Michael. After Holly was Angela. Is your hand still up, Angela?
Yes.
Excellent. Go ahead. And then we'll go to Michael.
Thank you, Maria. I too like to support Donna's presentation from the Audubon Society. I think what Donna was referring to on the Article 73 was the draft Article 73 that was done a couple years ago that was written up. It's 46 pages and very detailed. So I think that's what she was referring to as why we're not using that as kind of a something to look at. It was already created, written out. And then I'd also like to point out that the city of Clear Lake has a very extensive tree protection ordinance in place. And I'd be curious to know how inhibitive it's been to their commercial cannabis. Has it really resulted in a lot of permits being denied or people not wanting to cultivate within the city limits? But their tree ordinance is quite extensive, and I would hope that the rest of the county would want to be, on the same level as the city of Clear Lake. And also, I'm going to reiterate once again that there are tighter restrictions for cannabis. We got to remember that this is an industry that's only been legal in the county for 6 years. So that's the whole reason we're rewriting this ordinance right now, because it's lessons learned and what to predict for the future. So I hope everybody keeps that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead, Michael.
I was just gonna bring up, or, maybe put out there that for myself and what I've seen with Lake County, and maybe to answer the question about how come all of them have these mitigated negative decks, that as we go through these projects, and if there is substantial problems or substantial impacts to the environment, planning usually tells us, hey, this is going to be a non-go, right? Like, you guys aren't going to be able to get through this. So we don't wait till we get to the planning commission for them to then rule against it, right? It's already put forward. Like, if you get to a point where this is just not going to work for you guys, usually staff is really clear about that. And when staff tells you this isn't going to pass or it's not going to fly, then you would be a fool to push it through. And so I think that's why you wind up with what looks like all of these things look like this. Well, that's because the ones that wouldn't pass and that would have been, declined, they just were pulled because nobody was going to waste their time or money with it. So just to help maybe clarify a little bit why it looks like that. And that's my perspective.
Thanks. Is there any further public input? Seeing none, let's bring it back to the task force. Again, we're just looking for staff direction. We got a lot of really great stuff from the links that for Thousand Oaks and from other input as far as options. Kind of looking to see what sort of things the task force is interested in. If you want to just leave this wording like it is, fine, that's fine. If not, we're looking for maybe some areas of particular interest from the task force that we can then sort of gather shorter recommendations.
I would like to make a motion to amend the language.
To amend the language?
Yes.
To state what?
Well, before I read what my proposed amendment would be, I'd like to acknowledge Richmond and others' concerns about the importance of native oak species and woodlands within our community. I share the same concerns. I just think that any tree protection ordinance should be holistic and should apply to all industries and jurisdictions. And I think that we'll bottleneck things by creating our own here that's not consistent with other industries. Also, I thought Angela's sentiment with the Clear Lake Tree Protection Ordinance was interesting. I'd also be interested in finding out if the city of Clear Lake has had any inquiries about that ordinance and has had any violations or any enforcement actions taken upon that at all. But with that being said, my motion would be to amend the current language to read, the removal of any commercial tree species as defined by the California Code of Regulations, section 895.1, commercial species for the Coast Forest District and Northern Forest District, and the removal of any true oak species of tan oak for the purpose of developing a cannabis cultivation site should be avoided and minimized unless otherwise specified by a countywide tree removal ordinance. This shall not include the pruning of any such tree species for the health of the tree or the removal of such trees if necessary for safety and disease concerns. And I also just want to remind everybody, it already says it should be avoided and minimized. So it's not open season on oak trees.
Can you repeat your modification?
Yeah, the modification would be to
Should be avoided and minimized.
Yeah. For the purpose of developing a cannabis cultivation site should be avoided and minimized unless otherwise specified by a countywide tree removal ordinance.
Sorry, that was your motion, huh?
That's my motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I will second it, because I have those same thoughts. I feel like we could spend a lot of time drafting something here, but I think we should probably just keep it simple. And then, I don't know if the task force can, when presenting this to the board, that the task force has a recommendation that the county implements a county-wide, tree ordinance.
Yes, strongly suggest that to the board when we present this recommendation.
Friendly comment, I was thinking about stressing as well. Just, if the idea is to push the envelope a little bit or try and bring about some sort of change, push this to the body that we think should make that change, that being the BLS.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and what looks like consensus from the majority, but let's go ahead and take a vote on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Okay, 4-1. I'm assuming that from everybody. All right, well, that went faster than I was thinking. Next one, water use. Where are we? Take time. Yeah. So currently it reads that the utilization of water that has been or is illegally diverted from any lake, spring, wetland, stream, creek, vernal pool, or river is prohibited. And the cultivation site shall not be connected to public water. Let's actually, we need a little clarification on this because originally it said you couldn't cultivate cannabis within the sphere of influence of a municipal water system. And then there were a few cannabis permittees that were going to have problems with that. And they were going to use well water for their cannabis cultivation, but their house was hooked up to a municipal water system. And so the board went back in like maybe 2015, maybe 2014 somewhere, and passed a clarification of that requirement stating that you could not use a municipal or public water source for your cultivation activities. But you could still be located within, yeah.
What about indoor? Are they allowed to use municipal water?
This
Or does that need
would
to be
not allow it
specific?
to. A cultivation site, if it's indoor, is still a cultivation site.
Right, are there any indoor facilities that are approved?
Not that I know of.
That are using municipal water?
I don't think so offhand, but I don't really know. We'd have to
Yeah, I don't
check.
think so.
We don't have a lot of indoor cultivation sites, period.
Yeah, I can only think of one that was ever approved and I don't know what that looked like.
Yeah, I don't
Even
know.
though it's not active, I think it should be just clarified.
But so far as an understanding at this particular moment, cultivation site, whether outdoor, mixed light, or indoor, would still be considered a cultivation site for purposes of irrigation.
And then we did also include the ordinance 3106, I know it was requested, that we clarify what is required for hydrology reports and
Okay.
a little bit separate than what you're.
Yeah, that's not what we're doing right now.
So it does get in water source too.
It does. I don't want to jump down that rabbit hole just yet though, so. But let's make, I'll give people just an update on 3106 going forward in a minute. Or I can do it now. So there was a drought emergency, of course, you guys all know. And during this drought emergency, there was great concern regarding extra development that would be using water from underground or surface water sources. The board passed an urgency ordinance connected to the drought emergency that was going to require hydrology reports that would answer 3 questions. That's on page what? Oh, I just got it.
61.
So the important part is we require hydrology reports that would answer 3 questions. The approximate amount of water available from that project's identified source, the approximate recharge rate, or how quickly once you draw that water out of the ground, it replenishes from underground, and then the cumulative impact of water use to surrounding areas due to the project. This has been very helpful because our planning commission had been requesting these for a long time. And so we've started requiring these. However, the drought emergency has since been rescinded by the board. But the department still requires now hydrology reports for any project that is going to draw its water from a ground or a surface water source. If you have a project to propose that's going to use municipal water, we don't require the hydrology studies. But there is an article something something for applications that in that applications authorizes the department to require whichever studies they deem are appropriate for the project. And so our department intends to still require hydrology studies for any project, not just cannabis, but any project that is proposing ground or surface water use.
And CEQA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we need these studies in order to do our environmental analysis and answer the questions on the checklist for the state. Ooh, I see a response. Okay, that was just an update. Let's keep in mind that what we're deciding on, or what we're actually considering before Michelle got us distracted, was this clause or this sentence regarding water use in the cannabis ordinance.
So essentially what this clause states is you can't divert water illegally and you can't use municipal water.
Correct, for cultivation. Yep. That is basically it. That's actually exactly it. So 2 sentences, yeah. All right, is there any questions from the task force regarding this? And if not, we will go to public input on the ordinance wording itself. We're not going to argue or try to figure out when and where we are going to require hydrology studies. That is a separate article. Hold on, Margo. We still got a line online. So let's go to, we're going to do Holly, Sarah, Peter, Angela, Margo. Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, hi. I'm actually a bit confused about this section. There's basically just 2 statements right there. And just as a sideline too, this is listed under prohibited activities and it's titled water use. Maybe what you want to do is change it to diversion of water. But I guess the part I don't understand is if you go to the actual Article 27, pages 27-138 and 139 go into a very, very detailed thing of water use, conservation of water use, et cetera, which is not here in this tiny little paragraph. And I also don't see it anywhere in the outline. It looks like it disappeared from the outline, the upcoming outline. I don't know where that section went. And I was just wondering if someone could look into that.
Absolutely. Holly, those pages 27-138 and 139, those are not included in the prohibited activities section, right? Because I remember that this particular section is kind of short.
Correct. It's not in the, it's a much longer section, but I went through and I took a look at the new, the outline that lists everything that's coming up, and that entire section on water has been deleted, except for, I think, one word. I'm trying to remember what that was. Anyway, if you go and take a look at it, I don't know where this whole section that really talks about water in detail is now residing.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, this is Sarah Bodner, consultant. I have to admit that I don't know if this prohibition is affecting a large number of operators. Not a single operator that I've worked with on an application has been trying to tap into a municipal water supply. So I would say I'd love to hear from cultivators in the room if you think this is a provision that is problematic in any way. I know that for other kinds of cannabis industry activities, processing, manufacturing, it's highly encouraged to tie into municipal water. So I think as it relates to cultivation, I've not seen this be any sort of issue with projects I've worked on, and I don't know that there's any need to change it. I also wanted to flag one other thing you said, Maria, because this has been an ongoing confusion, I think, and administrative hurdle, is that as the board over the years adopted many, many resolutions and amendments to this initial ordinance, which of course is now dated and has required a lot of changes, some of those amendments, sometimes they were urgency ordinances, but sometimes they were actually amendments. And it all became a patchwork quilt of different resolutions and such, and those have not been updated on the county code or uploaded to the website. And it was something that Andrew was working on when he was here, was moving kind of bit by bit through those pieces, because it is a problem sometimes accessing these amendments. I don't know of the one that you referenced with relation to this paragraph, but I just wanted to flag that on the record, that I think we need to come back to that project that Andrew was working on and make sure all those amendments are available for reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Peter. Mr. Luchetti.
I'm curious as to why this part of the ordinance isn't treating the question similar to what you would see in any municipality in California that was considering bringing in a commercial industrial use to town for whatever reason. So it goes to economic development. Economic development says, yeah, we want to have this industry in town. Then you call up the water utility, supposing there is one. Now we're talking about municipal water, so they're not using a well, presumably their own well. And you say, do you have the capacity? And the director says, I have the capacity. Okay, so do you want the customer? Yes, the economic development and the water directors say yes, and they say, okay, we want this in our town. We want a water bottling company in town. We want whatever. We want it in town. Well, if it gets approved, and I don't think cannabis folks should be prejudicially treated. It's true of any industry. If it gets approved, then they're subject to the MIPP, the Municipal Industrial Pretreatment Program for their community, which is required by the EPA. So you say, okay, have them, if there's no objection to having them around and there's enough capacity, and I understand the drought issue, but still, if there's enough capacity, then they should be entitled to come. They should be entitled to use municipal water, and they should be required to comply with all the requirements of the MIPP, the Municipal Industrial Pretreatment Program, which is run by the water system, where they say, oh, you're a cannabis producer, so here are our concerns. And we don't want you discharging this or that or anything else into the wastewater system, presumably you have one, because it creates havoc down at the wastewater plant, throws our biodigestion process out of whack. So my comment is, wouldn't it make sense to change this policy in conclusion and say, fine, come ye, come all. We don't prejudicially treat cannabis producers. Go find out whether there's the capacity or not, whether that works or not. And if it does, follow the law. Create a municipal industrial pretreatment program and have at it.
Thanks, Peter. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Maria. I was wondering if the task force would be amenable to adding into that section something along the lines of irrigation and domestic water supplies shall not include water transported by vehicle from off-site sources. As we know, water haulers can move water from one side of the county to the other, which is basically diversion. So I think that would, if it's not transported by vehicle from off-site sources, that restricts you to what you have on site. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead, Margo.
Thanks, Maria. To piggyback on Angela's comment, to not have off-site water sources used for project. At the meeting where the Board of Supervisors rescinded the emergency proclamation for the drought, 2 supervisors expressed concern about water hauling, and that now with the emergency proclamation removed and the prohibition on water trucks removed, that concern still exists. So it's a big concern about water and sustainable growth in our county. So for your consideration. Thank you.
Michelle, do you have 27 up?
Yeah, and all the
Okay.
urgency ordinances.
Well, no, go down to 27. I think it's 13. I'm pretty sure there is existing wording that requires on-site water sources, and water should only be imported in times of emergency. But let's double check on that one. Okay, do we have any further public input? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think that what we're talking about is like a vice versa. So you got legal and illegal grows. And when you're getting up and going and you have a crop, no matter what it is, if your well goes down, to be prohibited from being able to buy a legal water, truck to keep your crop going would just not seem like that makes any sense. You're taking a tool away that everybody else gets the opportunity to use. And I don't think it should be overused or misused. I don't think you could or should run an operation based on water that comes from some other place. But to make it illegal to haul legal water to a legal cultivation site just seems a little confusing to me. And I think the original restrictions that we talked about, where water haulers were not allowed to deliver water, that was to illegal sites. That was not to legal sites. So.
Thanks, Michael. Angela, one last comment before we bring it back? Go ahead.
One last one, just to address what Michael just talked about. And it wouldn't, there could be something in there that says, like same thing for generators that can be used in an emergency situation, not trying to cut them off completely if there's an emergency. But just so that it's not relied upon as the sole source or a reoccurring source. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, no further public input. We'll bring it back to the task force. So the options are maintain the current language as is, amend the language, move this section to another section, remove requirements in this section.
I would like to make a motion that we change the title of it to diversion of water, since I'm not gonna make a motion, I'm just gonna talk about this. To diversion of water, because we're talking about prohibited activities, and that we move any discussion of water requirements to a water requirement section.
But that wasn't a motion.
It's a good one.
All right,
No,
so
go ahead to say it and then say it as amended. So I make a motion to change the title of number 2 to diversion of water, and move any talk of water requirements to a more appropriate section.
there is a motion on the floor.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because this is still all general requirements right now, right?
Yep, this
Yeah.
applies to everybody.
Okay.
I mean, no, this applies to every cannabis business,
Right.
not everybody.
Right. Okay, so I will second that.
Divert all the water you want.
Yeah.
Of course.
All right, so we have a motion from Jennifer, second by Catherine. All those in favor, vote aye. Anyone opposed to this one? Okay, those were wimpy ayes, but I'm gonna guess we had 5. Next one. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. I'll call you wimpy ayes. Wimpy. Odor. Let's do a time check. Yeah.
15.
All right, we're at 2:15. We have, oh wait, yep, we have about 15 minutes left. Odor. So far it says cannabis-related permits shall not propagate objectionable odors which cause injury, detriment, nuisance, or annoyance to any considerable number of persons or to the public, or that endanger the comfort, repose, health, or safety of any of those persons or the public.
So my concern here is that it's not measurable. So it is subjective. And I don't know how we have a subjective prohibition.
As well as establishing what limit, or what number of people is considerable.
It's a lot of open language.
And how is this written in other situations?
Probably, yeah. I do not know how it is written in other jurisdictions. I know that hypothetically, we would have established thresholds for odor through an environmental impact report, and then use some form of measuring or testing report to gauge the impacts of that odor. Or some sort of standard.
Or a chief odor officer.
I could use another body.
I just know when we had to pay the air quality fee, they came to one of my farms and said, we can't smell it. Somebody else can smell it. We can't measure it, so we don't really know why we're here. And that's just kind of stuck with me.
I think there is technology though, that would measure particulates in the
It's
air.
particulates, yeah, terpenes are particulates just like any other thing floating through the air, but yeah, I don't know that we have the technology yet.
But
But I
that's not
don't know that we
even
don't
what
either.
this really says, though. Yeah, I mean, the entire language of this would have to be amended if the goal was to set a standard and then measure it. Because regardless of the standard, somebody could still say that they're annoyed, or that it's a nuisance, or that it's a detriment to them.
Yeah, and I guess that's my concern, is just subjective. And so if there are measurable ways to address it, then I think we should move it to a section where it would be measurable, but to prohibit it, I think is impossible.
Or you could prohibit it based on the objection, the device monitoring.
Oh, Michael, hold on a second. Is there any more questions, thoughts of the task force? And then we'll open it up to public.
I guess my only comment is, like, even if having this in here, because it is subjective, like, somebody could be super sensitive to the odor, whereas other people are just like, don't even care, right? Or doesn't faze them. And then even having this in here now is like, how do you deal with that? Or if somebody's like, oh, this is really obnoxious and I'm getting headaches and all this, it's like, is there anything to even deal with that as is right now, if you get a complaint?
Or maybe that applies to cannabis operations that move into somewhere and then existing neighbors have complaints versus cannabis operations that exist, neighbors move in and then they have complaints.
Well, but cannabis doesn't have the same right to farm ordinance.
That's not what I'm.
But we are an ag product in the county.
Right. Sorry, I'm getting us down the wrong line. Over the last couple of years, since I've been back and been paying attention, when we get complaints about odor, we have sent planning staff out to sort of go over the conditions of approval that are supposed to be in place to mitigate that odor. And so, yeah, so there was one in particular that was, it's right in a valley, and so people were smelling it, and we went and we found that a number of the improvements they were supposed to have made had not been made yet. And so we worked with them to get them into compliance, and hopefully this year we'll have a significant improvement. So we do handle odor complaints. But we do it by going to that site to check to make sure that that they have everything in place that's supposed to be mitigating that to a less than significant impact. That's what we have done so far. Most of those have been indoor, either indoor cultivation or processing, not outdoor cultivation. Okay, I'm going to open it up to public, but Michael, just a minute, we're going to get back to you. We had a few hands up in Zoom before we get back. Go ahead, we'll do Holly and Sarah, and then there's supposed to be a third one. Oh, Aaron. Okay, we'll go Holly, Sarah, Aaron.
Oh, hi. Would it be possible to get Doug Gearhart or Air Quality to actually come in and talk about this, seeing as they are, allegedly the experts on it? And then secondly, I believe you're not allowed to burn cannabis, but that has happened. So is it possible to add in some language of no burning of cannabis?
That's a state law.
Okay.
So we should be able to just defer to that.
We can definitely extend an invitation, but I can tell you right now, Doug is so understaffed that I doubt he'll be able to make it. But if the task force wants, I will make a recommendation, though he is bound by his own regulations as well. So I don't know that he's got it all figured out unless the state has it all figured out. Okay. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Sarah Budner, consultant. This is a really challenging one because, as a few people have said, it's really hard to measure. It's really hard to evaluate. In my experience in moving projects forward through the Planning Commission, the commissioners are very sensitive to concerns around odor. But I think that, and they have often encouraged or required, as the staff has as well, odor mitigation efforts. And I think this would be a great place to have some more data and information about what has actually occurred, because this language was drafted kind of in the era of the specter of cannabis, when people were really afraid about what it could be. And now we have some experience. We have several growing seasons on the books. It would be really good to hear which of those odor mitigation measures have been helpful, what has worked, how many complaints have there been, and contextualize this discussion with some real information. And I think that could also help inform future projects that the commission hears about what has been successful. I think it's probably going to be really hard to measure because it depends on which way winds blow. And are we going to require equipment? And is that measuring equipment going to be funded by the county itself? I think we maybe need to dig into this a little bit further if we want to start making too many changes to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Go ahead, Aaron.
She's unmuted.
Aaron, we cannot hear you. You're unmuted on our end. Aaron, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, but keep trying. Maybe we can come back to you in a minute. Okay, and that is all of the public input that I see, except for Margot. Go ahead, Margot.
Thanks, Maria. So members of the task force, if you choose to retain the current language as is, I would request that you strike or otherwise modify this ambiguous phrase here, considerable number of persons, or considerable number of, just leave it to persons, because at what point, yeah, bless you, at what point is, what number are you considered considerable? Because otherwise, people who live out in the rural parts of the county, they could be deemed, well, you just don't count. And there's still odor there. So thank you.
Michael
Thank you.
also had originally wanted to speak, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I totally skipped you. I'm sorry, Michael.
Got you, Michael.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
I tend to talk too much anyways. I think that if my 2 cents on it, and doesn't make me right, but if we're going to use an ordinance or make a rule, it seems like we should have some way to quantify what we're talking about. When we talk about who likes what or who doesn't, I think that we have to keep in mind that the only reason we have this sitting in front of us is because of the voter initiative that brought this into this county. And so for something that as a group was, voted on and enacted and brought here, it meant it was very important to a lot of people. So to have that sidelined by maybe just one person, and I'm not saying that person doesn't matter or that it's irrelevant, but I think if we're looking at how this all wound up here in front of us, it's not like the cannabis folks just showed up and said, hey, we want to do this. No, this was a voter initiative. It was passed as a voter initiative. So we have a responsibility, I think, to the greater of everyone. And that's just my thoughts.
All right, thank you. Seeing no further requests for public input, we'll bring it back to the task force.
One more, Maria.
Oh. Hey, Angela.
Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna 2-part question. First one is the draft Article 73 that came out years ago, should we not even, is all of that work that was done in that should we just throw that, has that been thrown out the window, or? I guess the only reason I'm asking because there was a whole section on odor in there and it was quite detailed. It says, I'll just read you a little bit of it. It says, any cannabis odor shall not be equal or greater than a 7 dilution threshold when measured by the county with the field olfactometer at the property line on which the cannabis is cultivated or processed for a minimum of 2 olfactometer observations not less than 15 minutes apart within a 1-hour period. So 7 DT per hour. If the odor from the cultivation or storing facilities, etc., exceeds the 7 DT 1 hour at a property line threshold within the time required by the county, then then it goes on and on. So this is where I'm getting confused because this draft Article 73 is quite detailed and already went into figuring out how we could measure it, thresholds. If we don't want to use that, then maybe we need to consider setbacks. I don't know, but if you can clarify for me, if this draft 73 or should I not even be looking at that?
Good question. So we do still have an internal draft of Article 73. It was done before I got back, and then my direction from the board was pretty clear that we're going through, I guess, what was then set up a little before I got back, which is pretty much the structure that we've been doing. But since we've pretty much closed out our session for today, if the task force is interested, we can pull our draft of 73 and add it to the packet for informational purposes if the task force is interested.
I have zero interest in that.
Actually, really?
Maria, can I make a comment?
We got a wrap.
Sarah, we're about to close up for today. We can finish with you, but then we need to adjourn.
I'll be quick.
Public comment.
That draft ordinance is why this task force existed, or came into existence. Sorry, present tense. When that draft came out, it was so out of touch with the community, the cannabis, the neighbors. The board decided to start over from square one and form this cannabis task force as a representative group of stakeholders throughout the community. So that's why we're here.
Yeah, what she said.
Okay, thank you. So we're not taking any action on this today. Let's move on to public comments. Actually, before we do that, I just need a little bit of direction. Are you requesting additional information? Should we just pick up our conversation where we're leaving it off today next week? I just don't want to miss a cue if somebody wanted us to gather some data to support something. What's the will of the task force?
Well, is there any way to even measure that?
Sounds like there's an olfactometer thing.
Is there a willingness, a way to enforce it and staff to enforce it?
How about if we check out only a couple other jurisdictions to see if there's anything comparable? And if we find anything, we'll bring it back. Okay,
Yeah, I think we should just pick up where we left off today, but in
okay.
tweaks from there.
Okie dokie. Is there any public comments not related to anything that was on today's agenda? Go ahead, Holly.
Okay, sorry. I realize that there's about a minute left, so I want to reaffirm that I'd like to ask at the next meeting that we have a more robust discussion on the annual reports and the compliance inspection reports.
Thank you. Compliance inspection reports. What action did the task force take on that? Hold on, Ruby's retracing.
So now we provided all those examples.
Oh, that's right, we did.
Was related,
Have a
I think, to
couple.
like the action or something.
So let's go.
I also wanted to say that there was an entire list that I compiled that was attached to what I sent in, but that did not get to the task force.
Was that for this meeting? Or I don't know if I'm allowed to ask. Is that just-
All of them.
Because we've been including, we don't roll over every comment we've ever gotten in every packet.
No, there was an attachment of several pages where I actually compiled a list of what I thought was being requested.
Which is at the back of this packet. It's the very last couple of pages.
When she's saying this.
No, it was not included in the packet.
So we've got public comment forwarded, and then this last thing signed by you, and you're saying we missed a chunk?
There was an entire attachment in that first email in which I went through and I compiled everything from the COUs and Article 27 and handouts that I could find that seemed to show what was being requested. I can re-forward that.
Okay.
Basically, the conditions of, these annual reports and compliance reports are so important because it's supposed to be used to see how effective, the conditions of use are. And if they aren't, and I think the Planning Commission needs to know if what's being imposed is effective or not, or, what works better, et cetera. And so I just think a more robust discussion, because there is no checklist, would be really helpful. I'm more than willing to help work on it.
Okay.
And then on page 24 and 25 of the packet are the language modifications that looks like they were passed on July 1st, the annual inspection monitoring section. Oh, no, you go, you can say it louder.
I'm just trying to think, when would be an appropriate time to sort of continue to flesh that stuff out? Not that we're saying
Maria, Maria, I think that actually the perfect time would be in section, Jennifer had mentioned about reorganizing that last section. I think it's 73.6 or something, where it talks about application procedures and permitting procedures, and then it goes into permitting renewal, and it should be right there in the middle because that's kind of how the life of a project goes.
Okay. Okay.
I'm also open to sharing my annual review if that helps.
I think that Holly's comment is a little broader than that. It's more about how are we going to make sure that we're gleaning the data that we need and that the Planning Commission is getting feedback as we're moving forward on the efficacy of them in general. Is that pretty much what you're saying, Holly?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Is there any other public comment? If not, we're going to adjourn. Michael.
One real quick thing. I haven't at all heard anything about this, so maybe I'm the only person that's concerned about it. But the ability for anybody to come and pull every single cannabis cultivation license and all of the information right through any office window seems really dangerous for the cultivators.
I don't understand what you're saying, given that our permits are public record.
Yeah, and so when somebody comes and asks for that, I just think that maybe there should be like a redaction of maybe personal or site information that would be sensitive. I've never heard it brought up and I was thinking about it. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's in our ordinance. Okay, thank you. If there's no further public input, we will adjourn at 2:35. See you next time, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.